My name is Kim and I've been a Christian for over 30 years and I also happen to be gay. I think for me, I didn't become a Christian until I was about 19 at university when I had a very special personal and transformational encounter, I think, with God. And from that point on, faith has been central to my life and I can't imagine not having a relationship with God. And that has affected the way I've come to terms with my understanding of sexuality, how I've come to terms with the work that I do in local authorities, and also just who I am as a person and the way that I relate to people. So for me, it's probably the main driver of my life, and I can't imagine not being a person of faith and one who tries to follow Christ each day to the best of my ability. I think when I moved over to Northern Ireland, I don't think I realised how polarised Christians and gay people were perceived to be in this region. I think as time has gone on, what I have realised is that it isn't as polarised as I initially thought it was, that there are groups who straddle both being Christian and being gay. So organisations like Spectrum, for example, or Christians at Pride, or Methodists in the Accepting Sexuality or Changing Attitude Ireland. There still is quite a significant division, and the majority of churches would hold a very traditional view. And those people who are part of the LGBT community would often consider Christians to be in opposition to them, and if anything, being seen very judgmental. I think one of the things I have felt quite challenged by being a Christian who is gay is how do we bridge some of that? So I'm involved with the Rainbow Project, for example, which is the biggest LGBT support organisation in Northern Ireland, and who've been very welcoming of me as a Christian, and that has allowed me to bring a different perspective sometimes into discussions and the services that we provide. But I know it has also been a challenge to those who are in the Rainbow Project, actually meeting Christians who are not judging them, but who are gay. There are organisations like Spectrum who are welcoming places for Christians who happen to identify as gay, and also people who are their allies, their families and their friends. Spectrum is a place which effectively offers a monthly service. So for those of us who come from a more evangelical tradition, it would offer hymns, a sermon, storytelling, communion at times, and it would be a safe place where people can be themselves and yet worship God together. I don't think I've ever really felt I've had to choose between my faith and my identification as being a gay person and my sexuality. What I think I've had to struggle with is how I live my life, both as a person who is a Christian and a person who is gay. So for many years, when I was much younger, I was aware of being quite different. I wasn't a Christian at that point. And then when I went to university, I became a Christian. And I suppose as being a young adult, began at that point to realise that I had feelings that were different to some of my friends in university, where I was finding myself being attracted to other women and really struggling with how did that fit with the teaching I was receiving as a Christian, that homosexuality was wrong, was an abomination, and that often people who were seen to be gay should be cast out of churches. So for me, I think at that point what I did was I hid my sexuality. I thought, I'm not going to look into this, it's just a phase, I won't need to deal with it. And being quite a young Christian at that time, I in essence threw myself into all Christian things, so into Bible studies, into evangelism. I ultimately then joined a Christian organisation to work with them, where I was helping students develop their discipleship. And again, I threw myself into work and just avoided all these questions. And eventually, I suppose, as often happens with people who go into the closet, is that it's a very dark, isolating place and you can't keep yourself in there forever. And eventually I had a bit of a breakdown. And at that point, I suddenly realised I need to address some of these questions. So for me, the question was, how do I now live as someone who is recognising that I am gay, but I am a Christian, I am in Christian leadership. And the result was I had to leave the job that I was in. And I think through some help of friends and a Christian organisation that would be quite traditional in its viewpoint, I was able to come through and acknowledge that I was gay, but that the call was always to live a celibate life. And so for me, in terms of that, if you like, that reconciliation of my faith and sexuality, it was okay to be gay, but you must be celibate. From that point on, I got involved in organisations that helped other Christians live that way. But over the years that I was involved, I began to recognise that what we were trying to do with people was to almost enforce them to hide who they were and to suppress their feelings, their God-given personhood. It was seeing the harm that we seem to be doing to people, where people seem to feel an awful lot of guilt about who they were, that people were denying any sense of feelings, had to live quite isolated lives, often were self-harming. There was a significant amount of suicide ideation. And I think for me that just began to challenge me. Is this right, the way we're asking people to live these lives that are not natural for them, or for me? And to be fair, I didn't feel a huge amount of that, but seeing other people go through it really challenged my thinking. I also was very aware around that time that this was in the sort of early 2000s. A lot of other people were beginning to question the traditional evangelical view of what it means to be gay. And eventually I think I came to a point where I felt, having read quite a lot of books, having met a number of people who were gay but who had a different view of what it meant to be Christian and gay, to the conclusion that actually it is okay to have a same-sex partnership, and that those same-sex partnerships can be as honouring to God as any other sex or heterosexual partnerships could be. So as a consequence of lots of questions that I have, it really set me reading a lot of books, having lots of conversations with a whole range of different people having very different views in terms of this issue. I went to a number of conferences, both that were people who would have fairly traditional conservative views, but also those that were involved with the lesbian and gay Christian movement, or with Courage, who had recently changed their position from being really an ex-gay movement to being a movement that was looking to support people in their faith and their sexuality. As a consequence of that, I really came to a point of recognising that actually to be gay was okay before God, and to be gay and in a partnership was okay before God. Yes, at times it has been quite a painful journey, particularly because there have been people who would be really good friends, who stood by me when I was going through my own understanding of being gay, but feeling that it was appropriate to be celibate, suddenly see me go on this journey where I was moving to a position that was not tenable for them. And I had one friend in particular who basically said to me that she thought I was now going to hell. And that was a really difficult conversation to have. Now, we have managed to stay friends through what has probably been 10 years of that. And what I think has been very interesting is that due to some factors in her own family's life, she has now moved position on this. So I'm actually really pleased that we managed to stay friends through it all. I think it has also impacted me in terms of things that I can do in the church. So I was, as I said before, working for a parachurch organisation in Christian leadership, where I would have been asked to lead services, to have preached, to have taken conferences. And then suddenly, because I now have this position in terms of my understanding of faith and sexuality, that I was no longer being asked to do those things. There have been some more forward-thinking churches, I think, who have allowed me to get involved now with certain things. But again, often the criteria is you must be celibate. So if I ever had a partner, the reality is those doors would not be open to me in most churches. I would really hope in the years to come that churches would be more than purely what is referred to as welcoming, but actually begin to affirm and to celebrate LGBT people within the congregations, to acknowledge that we have gifts and talents and needs and abilities that are the same as everybody else in a congregation, and to enable us to play our full role I actually believe the church is so much poorer without LGBT people being full participants, and that would be my hope. I say in years to come, but I'd rather it be sooner than later. I would love this resource to be a way in which people who don't know any openly gay Christians would see the face and hear the voice and the reality of the lived experience of people who are both Christian, who stumble every day to follow Christ like everybody else does, and yet at the same time identify as gay people. I would say to my younger self, don't let fear control you. Trust in God. It does get better.